Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're watching this. This is an off-season edition of the Rosinbaggers podcast. I got Ty with me tonight. Looking good, bud. How you doing?
Looking good, feeling fresh. Gone after a 6-month stint is the Miles Michaelis mustache. We had a very hard realization here in the off season with the mustache. First of all, I realized that yes, it was a trendy thing to wear the stash because the baseball guys were doing it, and then I realized, you know what, like. I'm a decade older than Miles Michaelis, and I need to stop pretending like I'm in my mid-20s and being trendy and cool. So stop with all that silly bullshit and get back to clean shaven and look good, fresh for the show. Off-season edition. Oh man, we are in that stage of the sports season. For me, my football team's done. The Bills took the exit in the playoffs in a very humbling performance against the Bengals. If you're a hockey fan, this is the kind of the stage where you realize if your team's going to probably make a run at this thing or not. And for the St. Louis Blues, they've got defensive holes like Swiss cheese, and so the hockey season hasn't been going good. And I'm like, give me something to look forward to. And then lo and behold, baseball has arrived officially. The offseason with yesterday's big announcement of the Hall of Shame.
Yes, sir. Good to see you, Red Hood. Dad, good to see you. Yeah, it
Hey,
looks like the Braves are loading up and ready to go.
gang's
NL
all
East is going
here.
to be interesting for sure. All right, so yeah, let's jump into it. Let's tear the Band-Aid off. Let me, this. The results are in, and we have one Hall of Famer going in this season.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to disparage Scott Rowland because I think Scott Rowland is a fine baseball player. I do think he's a fringe Hall of Famer. I think if I had a vote, I probably would have voted for Scott Rowland. But what is the most embarrassing about this is that he's the only one on this ballot. And I think this is a continuation of what the BBWAA has done sort of to themselves, but also to sully the game of baseball. And I've got an equivalence for you. Have you ever said something to someone that you thought about afterwards and you're like, God, I really didn't mean that, but I was kind of caught up in the moment, had a little emotion, but now I kind of have to stick with it. I feel like the Baseball Writers Association basically told the world bear shit tastes better than chocolate, and now they've got to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because this result tells me exactly that. Because I'm looking at 3 players right now that should have been in on this ballot, in my opinion. And then I look down this list. I mean, look at you're talking Billy Wagner, one of the most dominant closers of all time. Gary Sheffield, a home run king. Carlos Beltran had the cheating stuff, and I'm sure his name's sullied. Jeff Kent. He was mean to the media. That's the problem they have with him. He's one of the best second basemen to ever play the game. Manny
Right.
Ramirez, the A-Rod stuff we know about. Manny Ramirez, we know about. He got busted as well and kind of fell off the end of his career. Omar Vizquel, one of the greatest fielders of all time. And he gets less than 20% of the vote. But I'm looking at Todd Helton. I'm looking at Andrew Jones and Jimmy Rollins.
Okay.
Jimmy Rollins didn't even get close. He got 15% of the vote. What are we doing there? Because you look at Scott Rowland's numbers. 8-time Gold Glover. You know who else was an 8-time Gold Glover? Andrew Jones.
Right.
Todd Helton was a 6-time, 3-time Gold Glover, 4-time Silver Slugger. Finished top 10 in the MVP 3 times. Was a 5 straight All-Star appearances. Had another MVP top 30. He finished 13th in the MVP later in his career. I understand the Colorado effect. I do. But when you're talking about a guy who's won that many Gold Gloves, finished in MVP voting that many times, Silver Sluggers, how do you leave a guy that's a 316 career batting average and 370 home runs? And Jimmy Rollins led the league in triples 4 times, won an MVP, won a World Series. I just don't know what these guys are doing, and I feel like they're just kind of cutting their nose off to spite their face. And you look at Andrew Jones. 8-time Gold Glover. All 8 were in a row, or 10-time Gold Glover. I'm sorry, all 10 were in a row. Won a Silver Slugger. Led the league in home runs once. Led the league in RBI once. Had 2 seasons over 40 home runs and 120 RBIs. Finished second in the MVP. I just don't know what we're doing here anymore with the Baseball Hall of Fame. And it just feels so much like the baseball writers have just seized this whole thing and they're being real fucking dickheads about it.
Yeah.
Because they got pissed at us with the steroid era thing. They promoted the steroid era, but now they want to take it back. And we're mad about that. So now they're just going to flail and throw a toddler tantrum. That's what it feels like.
It's got a little bit of that mixed in with my outside looking in view of this is I think somewhere along the way, and I don't know exactly what Hall of Fame class it was, and I know that there was certainly a lot of discussion, especially over the last few years, with the steroid era versus the players that quote unquote played the game clean. And I understand that there was a sort of dissonance with that, and that baseball writers had a quote unquote moral duty that they needed to uphold to for whatever fucking reason, despite the fact that you mentioned they created the era and quite frankly embraced the era. But now I think we've moved to the point where I think they honestly feel that there is an invisible line, an invisible certain set of criteria, and we don't take a look at each individual athlete that is up on that ballot and go on a case-by-case basis and take a look at things. We can't compare because these players now that are on the Hall of Fame ballot, they're all players that we grew up watching. They're all players that our generation is starting to come into. None of us are baseball writers. None of us younger than 40 are on the BBW, PPAA, whatever damn initials that thing stands for. And I think what we're seeing is the gap between the eras come into play. And I think that there is a, from my standpoint as a baseball fan, a little bit of a, I wish some of those dinosaurs would just retire and remove themselves from the ballot. I don't think that you have 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds that go to a 30 and under party and elect who should represent the top next piece of that generation. I want fans like us that grew up watching these guys, that lord these players. I mean, even in A-Rod and Manny, they were faces of the franchise. And I'm sure that if you had different people and a younger generation with those Hall of Fame ballots, that you were going to get a vastly different set of votes and set of numbers. And I'm with you. I have no problem with Scott Rowland. I'm a Cardinals fan. I'm glad he's into the Hall of Fame. He was a border pick for even me as a Cardinals fan. He was on the fringe. He was very much on the border. I probably would have gone in and put him into the Hall of Fame, but along with a whole host of other people who I really felt were deserving in this particular ballot to be on that class. I think it's a generational gap, and that's the best way I can describe it. And until some of these dinosaurs leave that post and get themselves removed from having that ballot, we're going to see more and more of a was not a holier than thou type. And you mentioned Kent, right? Trust me, as a sports writer, we take that shit into consideration. You ain't good to me, I ain't going to be good to you. You snub me for an interview, I'm going to snub you for the Hall. We're vindictive like that. That's in our nature. But to me, again, and I go back to square root one here, what is the sole purpose of the Hall of Fame but to be a museum of the history of baseball? And we are not including enough about the history of baseball and have not done since 1993 on. Once that steroid era hit, we have removed that part of history, and it's only going to slowly trickle in a few Hall of Famers here and there because the baseball writers are all in their 70s and need to retire.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that generational gap, right? And you're talking about like almost 2 full generations between us and these writers that are voting. Like the fact that like you've got like Plashke's got a vote and he's what 85. Like he is 2 generations separated from me, and that's the majority of the writers that are either fully 2 generations older
He's
or
one of the younger ones.
right, exactly. And it's just frustrating. It's very frustrating because I also look at it this way, right? And the Jeff Kent thing is one of those things, right? You snub me, I'm going to snub you back, and I get it. You can be very vindictive as a writer, but as a human being, you can be that way, right? It's not just baseball writers that are that way. But I look at the guys like Bonds and Clemens and Sosa and McGuire who were just snubbed for the Hall and are no longer on the ballot, right? And you're talking about 4, and there's more than just those 4, but there's those 4 were kind of the face of that era, and they're not going to be in the Hall. So what are we doing? Are we just erasing that era for what? Performance enhancing drugs? So let's go back an era before that and let's erase anybody who's taking greenies, because it was super rampant in baseball from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You want to erase that era? Let's erase that era. You want to go before that? We're talking about a non-integrated game, right? You want to talk about performance enhancing? You're not even playing against the best players.
Right.
Let's go before that. The dead ball era, the juice ball era, the spitball era. Like these are things you talk about the era, and that's part of the history of the game. And I think you and I can agree on that, because I've been listening to the Negro Leagues Baseball Hall of Fame podcast, and they talk about similar things to that. That like there's just eras of the game as it develops, and I don't know that we're ever going to change the minds of the writers that are in there right now, but the game of baseball, Major League Baseball, and I know they have almost no association with kind of how this whole thing plays out, but Major League Baseball, in my opinion, needs to step in and do something and say something. Or, I mean, I know they can just kind of wash their hands and play the whole plausible deniability thing, but this is a problem, because if you go to the Hall of Fame right now and you try to look at the history of the game from about 1990, let's say 1990 to about 2010, you're missing a huge chunk of what mattered and what moved the needle during that era. And it's, I keep going back to this, but it's like they saved your job. And now you want to punish them for that? Like these baseball writers would be without work right now if the game had collapsed. And that's what we were headed for in the mid to late 90s. You're talking the summer of 98. We may not have baseball right now without the summer of 98. That's what it means to the game. And for that to not be in the Hall of Fame, and for them to continue to try to put asterisks and throw mud at these guys, like, no, go fuck yourselves.
The problem with that is, and it's a great point, and I think you and I as baseball fans can have that argument and say, yes, this is a Hall of Fame in baseball, and this was an era of baseball that we watched and that we were in awe and in marvel of, and that we should be able to take our kids and grandkids one day and walk them through that hall and to just explain that entire era. The problem with all of that is, and I'm now play devil's advocate just for a moment, is we are living in the year of 2023, where anything and everything is scrutinized and looked under a microscope. If Major League Baseball was to right now make a press conference and say, we are going to be changing the way the Hall of Fame system is selected and the way our inductees to the Hall are chosen, and then they go back and retroactively put players from that era into the Hall, you will have a societal uproar from a mass number of people who are not even fans of the game, who will criticize that baseball and Major League Baseball and all the owners associated with it are openly advocating for performance-enhancing drugs or PEDs or whatever. You're going to hear that from the other side, and baseball is going to have a response and an answer. And I don't think from the societal standpoint, now from you and me, if they say, yes, this was an error, this is a museum of baseball, and we need to we need to put this era in our museum so that it doesn't happen again, which is really the only context for history.
Yeah.
We tell history stories so that we don't
We
repeat
learn
the
from it.
mistakes we did before, right?
Yeah.
But society won't see it that way, because society doesn't even see right now things that are in the history textbooks that happened on our home soil that they want removed. And you best be damned that they will be up in pitchforks if Major League Baseball wants to have these players. I get it. But at the same time, I'm crushed as a baseball fan for seeing it. To me, like the Hall, and I don't know, it's less and less impactful with the snubs that we have started to see trickle in. It's less and less of a place of a destination where I'm like, I want to go see the Hall of Fame. I don't want to see it because we don't include everything. And it's not a museum of baseball history. And until it does, and until we can come to some sort of compromise and agreement, and I don't care if it's an asterisk, get him in and tell that story for the Hamdis thing, so at least we don't do it again. At any rate, congratulations, Scott Rowland.
Yes.
He's deserving of the Hall, and going in with the crime dog as well. So that said, I was disappointed that more names won't be making speeches in Cooperstown.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you brought it back to that, because I didn't want to, take away from Scott Rowland.
No, this is not a poo-poo Scott Rowland show.
Right.
This is a
Exactly.
poo-poo baseball writers, because there should be more people standing next to him. There should be more people enjoying that moment with him that played during his career along with him.
Yep.
There should be more dudes on that stage.
Absolutely. All right, let's bring the energy up a little bit. Not as much negativity here, but a fun conversation about somebody's wild roller coaster of an off season.
There he is. Hey, look at that.
So,
the first cover athlete ever to play for three professional
teams.
God, Photoshop is good, isn't it?
It is amazing. The internet is undefeated. So he bounced from the Twins, who he opted out of his contract with, who signed him to a huge deal last year. And then he said, I'm going to be greedy and I'm going to leave. Signs a big deal with the Giants. They have some questions about his physical, and his slimy slug of an agent decides he's going to go shop him around off the books behind the scenes while the Giants are still waiting to have a conversation with him. And the Mets swoop in and say, we'll give you money and you can come in. And it's almost like the Mets just weren't paying attention to what was going on in the news with Correa and the Giants. And then they said, wait. We found this thing on your physical. Let's talk about it. There's a problem with your back, which is exactly what the Giants said. So then the Mets sort of balk and they back out, and then he ends up right back with the Twins.
For, mind you, and this is, I think, maybe the biggest justification for me in terms of the no, F you, I'm going to scrap my long-term deal and go test the waters. The fact that he comes back $15 million less than the Twins were originally set to guarantee him the first time, I think is like poetic justice for how this entire saga played out. But back on the physical, my question is, it's a $270 million deal from Minnesota.
Ooh, that's a good question. We'll come back to that.
For sure.
Finish up thoughts on Correa. We'll come back to that.
I don't even think the Twins made the right move after the pair of failed physicals. And here's the deal, and I'm only going to say this on the eye test. And mainly it's partially vindictive because he was on my fantasy baseball team all year long. He was the most highly talked about shortstop when he went over to Minnesota. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that'll be a good fit. I'm going to pick this guy up on my fantasy baseball team. I had a high draft pick for him. Listen,
Hitter's ballpark.
There are probably legit issues with that back because those numbers spiraled last year. He was a good baseball player. Carlos Correa is a good baseball player, but Carlos Correa with what appears to be a back ailment that a couple team doctors figured out, to me reminds me of a little bit like Patrick Mahomes with a sprained ankle. He can't do that fairy dust stuff anymore. He can't make magic plays. He's just an average dude. And average dudes don't make $270 million. I think Minnesota overpaid. This was wild. You're right. New York was oblivious to baseball news when they decided to swoop in.
They were asleep at the wheel.
But the Twins to me are the ones that really scratch your head and got after all of that. After 2 failed physicals, and then you're still going to be like, well, you can come back. I mean, I'm glad that they got the discount, but I felt like they could have saved a hell of a lot more money because at this point, 2 failed physicals, you're going to be desperate to sign for a baseball team. They could have lowballed his ass, and I wouldn't have blamed him for it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's wild. It is interesting to see him back in Minnesota, but it was kind of fun, kind of funny, and also kind of sad to watch how this played out. If I felt bad for the Giants, right, in this whole thing because they were the first to kind of say, "Yeah, we'll bring you in, but we've got some questions. We just want to talk," right? And then Scott Boras just says, "No, we're not talking. I'm just going to go talk to the Mets and see if they're willing to pay money."
Yeah,
and that felt really grimy. But I have to say, if anybody's going to say we know enough, it's probably the Twins because they had him last year. But I'm with you. He looks a step slow. He doesn't look like he's as flexible in the field. He had nowhere near the season he's had in the past fielding the ball, which is where he brings a lot of value with that big arm, that lot of range, very athletic, tall, so he can take away a lot of those line drives and those kind of bleeders into the outfield. He wasn't able to do that as much last year, and they even played him at DH a handful of times, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that with him there. But his bat wasn't good enough for me to say that's a natural transition because they've already got a pretty decent option to rotate at DH. So I'm curious to see how this plays out in terms of the life of this contract because it feels like the Twins really took a chance. Even though they got him at a lower number, it still feels like they took a big chance on maybe damaged goods.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, before we talk a little more offseason, let's circle back to this question. Yeah, we'll bring it right in here. So, what would be a good number going into the Hall per year? So, I'm going to frame this a little bit for you. So, the NFL has said between 4 and 8 every year, right? And often in most years, they try to keep it to 4 unless there's some, obvious kind of slam dunks for 5, 6, 7 guys, right? So there's usually between 4 to 6 guys going into the Hall of Fame that are voted in, and then they've got the senior committee, just like just like baseball does, etc. So I'm curious, Ty, if you think that there is a magic number that you would like to see for baseball, and if so, what is it?
Not the way the ballots are currently put together and distributed would I say that there needs to be a certain number. With the way that you fall off the ballot as you do in baseball, which is an asinine rule because society changes, people's minds change, writers change. The fact that you fall off and lose eligibility blows my mind. That said, I've seen ballots, and there has been ballots that have come across where I've looked at it and I said, I got nobody.
Yeah,
I got nobody. I think maybe the year Tim Raines went in, and I don't know exactly what year that was, but I think he was the only one that went in. I struggled to find a name on that ballot that I would have circled and put into Cooperstown. I don't think that there's a magic number on it. I think if you went back to expanding the rules of eligibility to be on the ballot, I think we could say a 3 to 4 to 5 max class would be good. And again, this is all prefaced with the fact that you can't lose eligibility. So, you take a look at the 3 to 5 best people in that particular class. Those names leave. You still have names left over that you can choose for the next coming ballot. You're not expired. There's no clock on you. You just didn't make it this year. That would be the way that I would handle the Hall. And then I would say at that point, we could probably be looking to, hey, let's find a cap. Let's find a min. Let's send 3 or 4 guys in. Maybe a legacy Hall of Fame vote that's done completely different other than the baseball writers. Maybe a fan vote. There's
I wouldn't mind seeing a fan vote.
I would love one selection.
One guy
comes from the fans.
One guy
fan vote goes before the baseball writers.
Yep.
That selection is in the can. And you know damn well that would have been Barry Bonds last year.
Oh yeah,
on a 99.7% vote.
Yeah.
3 to 4, extinguish the eligibility requirements, and I'm good with 3 to 4.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. That sounds like a really good a really good balance, because when this question first came in, the immediate thought in my mind was, I don't know that the baseball writers could handle being told, right? Like being told they have to put 2 or 3 guys in. I think they would rebel on it, and I think we'd get a situation like Levitard selling his vote. I think that
Right.
guys would do some dumb stuff like that. But I really like what you just proposed, and it sounds like my dad does too. I like the fan vote for one. Let the BBWAA have at it with the rest of them, and I hate that they drop off the ballot because it is dumb, and it feels like in the past we've seen guys wait, and they strategically like went up 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, 5 points until that last year of eligibility. The baseball writers were like, okay, we'll save the day and we'll put you in. Like, no, fuck that. So I'm with you. I actually really like your proposal there. That was really good. It sounds like you've thought about that before.
Tyson for commissioner.
I like it. All right, so let's circle back, a little more off-season talk. So I want to ask you, maybe what are a couple of moves that you've seen this off-season that you think are either, you can talk either really good, like a team hit a home run, or you can talk the other side and say, I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah, first one that drops out of my mind immediately is middle infield, and I've got 2 middle infielders, actually 3, to be honest with you, that I think are really going to be a shakeup, and certainly a shakeup to get used to. And I'm looking at the shortstop position, and I'm going to start in San Diego with their acquisition of Xander Bogaerts. To me, A++ move for San Diego because of the situation, right? Because of the Tatis situation, they need to go out and get somebody. And you couldn't have got a more sound at the peak level of his Major League Baseball professional career. You couldn't have got a better choice than Xander Bogaerts, and he is going to be sorely missed in Boston and going to be an extremely welcome addition to San Diego. Now, that said, I will also say that Boston, for what they're worth, they're rolling the dice. I'm taking the Boston to Vegas if this baby pans out. But they go to Kansas City, the Royals, and they grab Alberto Mondesi, which on the surface, it had mixed reactions. And I'm from the Midwest, and I've got a lot of fans that are Royals fans and a lot of fans that went up in arms about this. Alberto Mondesi, I think, has played in maybe 6% of the games that he has been. Don't quote me on that, but he is
close.
He's made of glass. Okay, yeah. He is consistently hurt, and there's a huge injury risk factor with that Alberto Mondesi. However, and I've still believed this since I've watched him day one in Omaha as a AAA guy, I've honestly felt like he can be
what a boom or bust,
a premier shortstop. It's boom or bust. Boston made a bold play in selling not selling, but shipping off, if you will, the guy is going to do it, and then you bring in Alberto Mondesi. So I like what the Red Sox did there. I hope it pans out for him, and I hope it pans out for Alberto. It just didn't work in Kansas City. He was always hurt. And then you really got to like it, and Stove is going to love this. I'm gonna talk up his Cubs a little bit. God, Atlanta had locked everybody down, and I thought, my God, who's going to pry who away from the Braves? Well, into the Cubs, and made a pretty good deal on Dansby. That will help out their lineup a lot. He is the type of player, in my mind, that's going to, I think, inject some extra leadership into that clubhouse. A guy that has been on winning baseball teams, a guy that has been on teams that have made extremely remarkable runs in the postseason. Dansby's going to bring that experience factor to Chicago. And then you just look up and down their lineup, and I look at Chicago maybe as a top 3 offseason winner.
Yeah.
In terms of what they did. And they're all straight up clubhouse dudes. Dansby, Hosmer, then you add Mancini. They put together the right pieces offensively. And, one of the things I know Stove was questioning about with Chicago is, well, did we do enough for your pitching? I'm a firm believer in Jameson Taillon, and I have been a firm believer in Jameson Taillon. He is a monster in the
He's got
National League
electric
Central.
stuff.
When he was with the Pirates,
Yep.
Pirates sucked. Jameson Taillon was mowing down National League Central batters like you wouldn't believe. It was a Sandy Alcantara deal
Yes, it
with
was.
Miami. And he never got any recognition because the Pirates sucked so damn bad. You put him back in the National League Central with batters that he has familiarity with and knows how to cut down. Oh, man. Taillon's a good pickup. And so is Boxberger in that bullpen. Chicago's pressing a lot of right buttons. And I think because of the season that they had, they're flying under the radar, and they are going to be nipping at a lot of people's heels. They made some big moves. Your thoughts?
No, I agree with you on a lot of those. The shortstop position was really interesting this offseason. Trey Turner obviously was kind of the first real chip to fall. Philly reunites Trey Turner with Bryce Harper and adds to that lineup. He's a guy that can be your leadoff guy. You can just plug him in every day, and you got a guy who just creates excitement on the base paths. I think the NL East, with the moves they made this offseason, are going to be really, really tough because the Braves are already there, and you said it, they locked up everybody, it felt like, which I'd love to see. And they're getting guys back off injury. Acuna is going to be one more offseason removed from his injury. Orlando Arcia and Vaughn Grissom, they think, can handle the shortstop duties, the middle infield duties there in Atlanta. So they don't feel like they're going to lose a lot losing Dansby, but I think it's a huge win for the Cubs. I think that's great. But the Bogaerts move does feel like kind of the coup of the offseason so far, because you're already talking about moving Tatis to the outfield last year when you had Kim just playing shortstop, but now you're adding a guy who's a stud, maybe top 3. You could probably lump him in the shortstop conversation. There's maybe 3 guys you lump into that conversation, and he's one of them. And you add that to your lineup that was already pretty stout, a pitching staff that you were able to preserve. You restarted Suarez, who's a big time reliever for them. I think the Padres had a good offseason, but you mentioned it, the Cubs. I think the Cubs hit some home runs, and I wanted to highlight Taillon. I'm glad you hit on Taillon because I think that's a coup for them, because of how good he was in Pittsburgh, and how is it easy to be a good pitcher in the AL East? You know what I mean? So he had a good year this year. Most of the year he had a good year this year for the Yankees. So those are the big ones I wanted to highlight. The other big thing for me in the offseason, I know we've kind of touched on it briefly, but it's keeping your own. And it's not just guys like Aaron Judge, who had an expired contract and they resigned, or a Correa who had a whirlwind offseason, or a Nimmo, or some of these other guys, Edwin Diaz, and those guys that just said, hey, our contract's expiring, we will resign you. It's the teams that went above and beyond and said, we're going to sign you now before you get to arbitration even. Like, there's so many guys that re-signed, not only at the end of last year, we saw a bunch, but this offseason, there's been 6 or 8 guys that are studs. And these teams have said, we're not even going to bother going to arbitration. And I love to see that now, because it's been so frustrating for so long to see these players get taken advantage of by the system, that I commend these general managers. I commend these teams for saying, things have changed, right? In the CBA, things changed, but not to this effect. This is on the teams, the GMs, and these front offices saying, we're going to keep our own, and we're going to keep a core together for a long time. You look at that Braves roster, especially. My dad's in the chat here. You look at that Braves, they're locked up for 5 years with essentially maybe the best young core in baseball, maybe south of Baltimore, right? Like,
and they did it all. They did it all before winter meetings, which was the impressive part.
Yes.
They walked into winter meetings saying, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
We have no work to do.
We're going to get ready for next year.
They're in San Diego at winter meetings, and they're partying while everybody else is trying to find a deal because they've already done their stuff. One more team I wanted to touch up on, and on the offseason. And you mentioned about locking guys up and getting guys secured. And one of the teams that did that was getting Martin Perez for the Texas Rangers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, by the by, did Texas have a hell of an offseason?
Yeah.
Because here's the deal. Last year, you took the Rangers. And
I was a year early.
You took a lot of crow for it. The Rangers certainly had the pieces offensively to make that contention in the West. But as that season progressed and as things started to unravel, we realized that their pitching was an absolute shit show and a disaster. What did they do in the offseason? Well, absolutely load up on arms, maybe the best arm in baseball when healthy, Jacob deGrom. And then you add the lefty, Andrew Haney from the Dodgers. And now I'm trying to figure out what your rotation is going to be. You got deGrom, Haney, and Perez, and all of a sudden you're looking a little bit like what the Mets looked like at the beginning of last year with deGrom and Scherzer and Bassett. Those are some big names, and Martin Perez is just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of what his potential is going to be. I truly believe Martin Perez is going to be a dominant superstar on the mound. For me, the Rangers loading up on those arms have made them an instant contender in the West and certainly in contention to be in the winner's circle of the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I was a year early on the Rangers, apparently. We'll see. They need DeGrom to stay healthy, man. I think that's going to be the biggest factor for them is him staying healthy, because if he is healthy and they've got a deep rotation finally that goes 3, maybe 4 deep, if they can get another arm to really step up, that changes everything for them. Because last year it was, well, if the guys at the top are good, the rotation will be okay, and they're just going to score a bunch of runs. And the guys at the top were not good, and they scored runs, but not enough. So,
yep.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about next year. So we are T-minus 19 days until pitchers and catchers report. February 14th is the earliest reported pitchers and catchers reporting date, and we are officially getting close to spring training and really starting to look at when the season starts again. I think we're under 80 days now before the start of the season.
Oh yeah, we are under 80. God, we might be under 70, to be honest with you. I had the clock the other day. I posted the clock in the chat the other day, and then I forgot. So
yeah,
but yeah, spring training right around the corner. Pitchers and catchers reporting. Like, it is, honest to God, the first sign, and maybe you probably experienced just as much on that into the US as well. Thank you, Google settings, for letting me know that my storage is full. The Midwest is cold as hell in the winter. We have ice that starts to form from about Halloween on, and the ice just slowly builds, and this frozen tundra of snow just continues to catapult the Midwest. The only sure sign that, for the love of God, we're going to come out of this hellhole is pitchers and catchers reporting. To me, like, that's the first official day where I can get excited and be like, I don't have to live in this shit no more. We're going to have baseball right around the corner. Stupid excited to get things underway. 19 days. If we can just fast forward that a little bit, man.
Absolutely.
Woo!
So I want to hear from you. What are a couple things maybe that you're looking forward to next year? What are some of the storylines that you're looking at? You know, obviously we're talking way too early because spring training can reveal a lot, but what are some of the storylines you're going to be, tumbling around in that noggin of yours as we approach the season?
A couple that come to mind. First is, we still don't know what we're going to do with the best superstar in baseball right now with Shohei Ohtani. Mm-hmm. The Angels have basically balked and walked back their original comments from earlier about potentially selling the team, which I think was going to be a breath of fresh air for Angels fans everywhere. And the fact that they're walking that back is a little bit like, ugh, do we have to endure this? Or is the idea that, hey, maybe we're not selling, is maybe I have an ace up the sleeve. Maybe I have a card that we haven't played yet. Will the owner for the Angels, whose name eludes me, because
there was a time, so Artie Moreno, there was a time that he was willing to go out and do these things and make these moves. You look back when they had Socia at on the bench, like, they made moves. They were buyers at every deadline. They played in a World Series, and this is the Rally Monkey and K-Rod, and they had a lot of fun around them, and they were willing to make those moves. But it's been weird the last maybe 8 years. And of course, that's been the Mike Trout era.
Right.
And we've been sort of robbed of Mike Trout playoff baseball.
Yeah. And I'm curious, do you pull an ace? Because the entire division around you is getting a shit ton better.
A lot.
And you are the only one that has stood on the sidelines and just sort of been watching and observing. And you can't watch and observe on Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout alone and expect to be competitive with all the other teams in the American League West is now pulling an American League East.
Yeah.
You know, to me, it's the college football version of the SEC and the Big Ten. You have got two powerhouse divisions that are just loaded and continuing to load. Will the Angels step up and compete in that division, or will they back off and be a laughingstock? And if they're a laughingstock, you got to get Shohei the hell out of there.
Yeah.
You got to do it. I'm sorry. We're done.
Maybe both. Honestly, maybe it's time to trade both. You know.
So yeah. Number one watch. What are the Angels going to do? Are they going to make a move? Are they going to be competitive in what's going to be and looks to be a very competitive division? Number two, can Baltimore sustain the momentum that they had a year ago? Right now, they're trending down on the stock market. Yeah. They didn't make a lot of splash moves. I was really hoping that last year's momentum would have sort of lit a fire in the ass a little bit at winter meetings and maybe said, okay, maybe we're a guy or two away. And maybe Baltimore is, right? Maybe there's a few more pieces that they think they need to go after and get. But I thought, okay, let's go out and get an arm. Let's make a splash. I didn't see Baltimore do it.
I expected them to be in on DeGrom, Rodon, Verlander, one of those arms, right? Mm-hmm. Even like a Tyone, a second level guy. I expected them to be in on a pitcher, just like you. And I know we talked about that at the end of the season. Like, you've got this great core, you need some pitching, and they didn't go do it. And I know they've got arms in the farm system. I understand that, but right now, I do think they're like a proven commodity on the mound away from really saying we're here to play.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see them make a move.
I would have too. My third watch will go probably back into the Aaron Judge show, man. I mean, the guy put up impressive numbers, and I know we got sick and tired of hearing about the American League record, but can Aaron Judge go a step further?
Yeah.
Can he challenge? If pitchers are still going to pitch to this guy,
right,
for whatever reason, pitch into him. If they're going to continue to throw to Aaron Judge, can he take last year's number where he set the AL record and maybe approach the major league record? Could we see the summer of 98 turn into the summer of 2023 and bring an entire new fan base to baseball? Because they will watch.
Oh yeah.
They watched Judge last year. They watched Pujols last year chase these historic numbers that have that were thought to be for generations untouchable, and they reached those milestones. And you saw it, national television. It was can't miss TV down the stretch in late August and early September when Pujols was going after 700. I had alerts every time Pujols would step to the plate. I had alerts every time Aaron Judge would step to the plate, and that brings in a new fan base. Can we go chasing after some more records in 2023? Those are my three storylines.
That's excellent. Yeah, I look forward to all those. The one more that I look forward to is the NL East. I saw what the Mets did and what they tried to do with Correa, what they did getting Verlander, and you're talking about trading a guy who's always hurt for a guy who has the fountain of youth. He put a ring on the fountain of youth, apparently, who never gets old, never wears down, and he's just a horse. He's been through Tommy John and bounced back and just seems to log innings, and he's a bulldog. Adding that to the rotation, is that going to make the NL East even more competitive this year? The Braves being healthy to start the season, is that going to make them even more competitive? And are the Marlins going to be able to do anything and make it a 4-horse race? But we're talking about a division, and I haven't even mentioned the team that played in the World Series last year, right? So the
Right.
NL East is going to be really fun to watch, I think. I think it's going to be a 3-horse race. I don't know that Miami's got the horses to really compete with those 3 teams, but that's my other storyline is we've got some heated divisions. And I was going to bring up the AL West. I was going to bring up the AL East,
Right.
and I wanted to mention the NL East. So I'm glad you hit those two, and I just want to give some love to the NL East because we talked about it quite a bit last year with the chase when the Mets were falling apart and the Braves were catching them. And then the Phillies, of course, getting in as a wild card team and making a run to the World Series. Is that division going to be as competitive this year? I think it is. I don't think it's as deep as the AL East and the AL West, but I think it's going to be just as heated at the top with those 3 teams.
Absolutely. You know, I'm also really curious about like the National League Central too, right? Obviously as a Cardinals fan.
Sure. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
But secondly, like the team that has perplexed me year after year after year after year is a team that just cannot find, for whatever reason, any footing, despite on paper, Milwaukee hands down should be winning that division. And I'm sorry, last year should have been a runaway. It shouldn't have been close. Milwaukee
They
has
shouldn't have been in a position to even consider trading Hader.
heads and tails. Their roster is better than the rest of the National League Central right now, 1 through 9. You know, you got Goldie and Arenado, of course, with St. Louis, and you know, I'm not going to poo-poo those guys, but they're a better baseball team. And they have never found the right substance. Like, I'm honestly curious from the National League Central side of things. Is anybody going to play with St. Louis anymore?
Yeah.
Like, no offense, and I toot my own horn on this, but we've had a pretty. Now you go back to 2 years ago, right? Like we had to kind of scratch and claw, and we had to win 17 games in a row to get there. but last year was pretty much feet up. Once we caught Milwaukee, and once they passed them, they didn't look back.
Coasted.
You know, and they coasted into the postseason. So I want to see if anybody wants to play ball for that National League Central pennant. I hope I didn't just put bulletin board material, by the way, for every team out there. Like,
yeah.
Please keep winning 60 games.
For sure. All right. Well, let's bring it to a close. You got any closing thoughts here in our first off-season episode?
Oh, man. Yeah, you know what? I'll go back to the entire way that this offseason has shook up. The fact that my closing thought is this. I'm super excited that we had a normal offseason. I'm super excited that we didn't have to sit there and get notifications for Jeff Passan tweets. You know,
are we going to have a season?
Are we going to have a season? There was never going to be a season today. There never was going. You know, you remember that just constant thread from Passan. Yep. I'm excited that we didn't have to learn about the very fine, minute details and get into the dirty business of baseball that we had last year. That drug a lot of shit and uncovered a lot of stuff. Yep. And from the casual baseball fan, the person that might have been wanting to be a fan, but saw all that dirty laundry get aired out in the public like it did. And I get it. It's the social media era, right? That stuff is going to come out. Whereas in the past, you might have been able to have labor negotiations that would not have been so intentionally scrutinized by the media. I'm glad we had a clean off season. I'm glad that we were able to go to winter meetings. I'm glad we were able to have these conversations in a for the first time in a long time post-COVID world. These things, normal things, getting back to normal in baseball excites me. And it reinvigorates me a little bit and gets me ready to go for spring. My number one and final thought was, welcome back to normal. Welcome back to baseball.
Yeah. That's it. Really is, right? Last year it felt so just kind of wishy-washy, and it was not the way you wanted a lot of things to play out. You had the Tatis thing, right? He couldn't see his doctors, and it was, you mentioned the dirty details. It's players wanting, you know, another few million per player, yada, yada, yada. And it became this narrative of billionaires fighting millionaires, and it became ugly. But that's the reality of baseball, right? And you mentioned it. Did we sour some fans last year? We might have. We might have. But as we look ahead to this coming year, I want those fans that may have been on the fence last year to understand that, as you said it, you put it perfectly. This is normal. This is what an offseason of baseball looks like. And this is what you have to look forward to. As long as that CBA stays negotiated, we will continue to say we're only 19 days away from pitchers and catchers. And that, for everybody in a cold weather state, tells you spring is on